Might be because it was full. Might only do X amount of that a time.
Oh yeah, that's a big
Okay, so there it is, the world famous and much photographed Needles Lighthouse. I've been there a very long time, 1858 it says above the front door, and it still does exactly the same job today as it did on the day it opened. The big difference now is that it is no longer manned. It's fully automatic and controlled remotely from Harwich up on the east coast. Just a little thought, if you are done taking pictures, you'd like to just sit down because you will be blocking the view of the people behind you. Yeah, the Lighthouse still does the same job today as it did on the day it opened. Definitely not a relic from the past. Big difference now, no longer manned, no one lives there, seems a bit of a shame, but the job of lighthouse keeper just doesn't exist anymore. Back in the day there were 3 of them on there full time, and they did about a month on, month off, but obviously that could be severely affected by winter storms. Their trip to work involved jumping from a small boat onto those very slippery steps. Lighthouse does a number of important jobs. It's warning mariners to keep away from the treacherous Needles rocks and the equally treacherous surrounding coastline. But it also guides vessels in. There's 2 ways up to Southampton from the English Channel. You can go either side of the Isle of Wight, and they're called the Eastern and the Western approach, and we're sitting in the Western approach. Now, you may have noticed we're not exactly busy with commercial traffic. There's a good reason for that. Despite appearances, the Western approach has always had a very dodgy reputation. It's extremely difficult to navigate with a vessel of any great size. Loads of things to bump into, some you can see, but loads that you can't. There's a ridge of chalk runs from the lighthouse straight out for a mile over to that marker point way in the distance called Bridge Reef. That's claimed many a shipwreck. Local sailors, well, they sort of know where it is, but during the round the island race, you can guarantee 1 or 2 of them will spill their gin and tonic as they hit one of the rocks. And then between us and the Hampshire coast over there, it all looks fine. Actually, it's not. There's a sandbank that runs from Hurst Castle all the way down the middle of the bay, and it's so shallow over there between us and Hampshire that on certain low tides it actually becomes a chain of islands. So as modern shipping has got bigger and bigger, they pretty much ignore the western approach and everything goes in through the eastern approach. And if you've ever been to France or Spain on Brittany ferries, that's the way you would have gone in and out to Portsmouth. So I've just pulled away a little bit from the Needles rocks so you get a fine panoramic view of those. They're so named because of the rock that went missing. There used to be 4. And the 4th rock stood in the biggest of the 3 gaps that we're going past in a moment. Didn't look anything like the rocks you see before you today. It's a hugely tall, slender column of chalk, much taller than the surrounding rocks, and some say it had a little hole through the top. So it did look a bit like a giant needle. But unfortunately, due to its shape and size, very vulnerable to the winter storms, and sure enough, some 250 years ago, in a particularly bad storm, it got knocked over and washed away. But the feeling at the time was that the area had already been mapped and charted as the Needles. That's what mariners knew it as, so they just stuck with the name.
Yeah. cormorants.
Passing here, they're not very deep, about 10 metres or so, marking the beginning of the erosion process. There's been such extensive back chalk rock, taken an awful long time, hundreds of thousands of years, and eventually if the sea and the shingle chewing away, it will push through towards the side to create an arch, the arch drop away in another few thousand years and form a stack. And this left cave here, actually little family of seals you've seen living here recently, popping in and out of stacks. Get to see a few seals every now and again, but more commonly dolphins down here. You do get to see those every now and again. But these are very interesting. They're Victorian gun slots. They're all a part of the old battery at the top. Now the idea was, of course, to mark where the dead spots the cannons can't reach. The French ships were to do what we were doing, hugging the coast. They could shoot them down at sea level. And to be honest, think of most of these forts, by the time they actually built them up, it would take them many years. And that was no difference here. It took about 3 years to dig down by hand, 200 feet. By the time they got down here, well, the whole thing was already over, to be honest. So,
Folks is asking us about time.
no waste of time. Now, although they did come in useful in the First and Second World Wars, when they were manned again, nothing really happened. Nobody turned up, so a gun was never fired from here in anger. They're closed off on safety grounds after the Second World War, and very few people have been allowed in since. Although every now and again we do see paddle boarders and kayakers, and they try and climb in through the windows.